Talk of this session by Robert Knowles from University of Manchester, and the title of the talk is Numbering Planets and Equating Facts.
Okay, so I should start with a brief apology, because as you've probably seen by the handout and on the other kind of handout you've got, the title of my talk has changed quite a bit and so has the content. So apologies for that. I was a bit overambitious about what I could achieve in half an hour. So the original plan was to convince you that I am in possession of the correct semantic analysis of sentences such as one on the sheet. A bit overambitious. Today instead I'm going to convince you that it's at least a promising account by showing that it has some nice consequences not only for the semantics of these kinds of sentences, but also in other areas of semantics. Namely the semantics of questions and the semantics of specification sentences. Okay, so first of all, why these sentences? Well, these sentences are kind of philosophically significant, partly because people think that they're certainly sentence one is obviously true.
Sorry, can you keep the
bit higher?
Yeah.
People think that sentences, some of these sentences are obviously true. So sentence one, the number of planets in the solar system, obviously true. Another reason why people think they're significant is that this kind of language is indispensable to our practices, so including science. Talk of numbers is indispensable. And philosophers rely on these features to argue for various positions in the philosophy of mathematics. So an example of an easy argument would be 1 is true only if the number 8 exists. 1 is true, therefore the number 8 exists. Okay? So that obviously relies on the kind of standard Phrygian semantic analysis of sentences like 1, where terms like the number of planets in the solar system stand for a particular number, and terms like 8 stand for, well, the number 8 in this case. And the is, the copula, expresses identity. So quite a few philosophers now have analysed sentences such as 1 instead as specification sentences. And specification sentences do not include terms that stand for numbers, and have argued then that the kinds of arguments I just mentioned fail. So my account is going to be similar to these accounts, but my philosophical conclusions are going to be slightly different. Okay, so I'm going to start with some new thoughts about the semantics of questions, show how that feeds into a kind of a better analysis of specification sentences, show how this leads into an analysis of 1, and then draw some philosophical conclusions. Okay, so linguists and philosophers generally distinguish two kinds of question clauses. You've got your direct questions, such as who are you, where are we, where are my keys, typically ending in a question mark. But with for every direct question, there is an indirect question clause, such as where my keys are, where we are, and so on. And the guiding principle that people take when trying to give us semantics of questions is that to understand a question, this is just an intuition, you must grasp what might count as an answer to that question. So I'm just going to assume that's true, that seems right to me. But another desideratum that they take, generally speaking, is to explain the relationship between direct and indirect questions. So what does the question, where are my keys, have in common, or how does it differ from the indirect question, where my keys are? And the kind of standard way of doing this is to analyse indirect questions first as denoting what counts as an answer to that question, and then analyse direct questions in terms of indirect questions. So, where are my keys is just the indirect question where my keys are, which picks out its own answers, plus some request for the listener to give the speaker some information. So what does it mean for something to pick out its own answers? Okay, so, well, there are two ways you can do this. Either an indirect question picks out the set of propositions that count as possible answers to that question. So the indirect question, where my keys are, on this view will pick out the set of propositions describing all the possible places that my keys could be. The other way is just to take it to denote only the true answer. So if my keys are in my hand, the indirect question, where my keys are, picks out the true proposition, the keys are in my hand, or that describes that state of affairs. Both accounts, unfortunately, run into problems. The first one, if you look at your sheet at 3A and 3B, it runs into problems in embedded contexts. So suppose that Bill and Susan both passed the test. 3A and 3B, John told Mary that Bill and Susan passed the test. And 3B, John told Mary who passed the test. Okay, both of these should have the same truth value in this circumstance. But according to this view, 3A would be true, 3A would be false under a kind of naive interpretation, because John would be telling Mary all of the possible propositions that might count as an answer to the clause who passed the test. So what this is going to require is kind of an ad hoc interpretation of the verb told, to kind of get the distribution of truth values right. So you're going to end up with a messy semantics on this view. If you adopt the second approach instead and have indirect questions picking out only the true answers to the questions, you run into another problem. And that is basically that you've analysed away questions. So you presumably answer clauses also pick out or express the true answer to the corresponding question. And on this view, indirect questions also pick out the same thing, and you're analysing direct questions in terms of indirect questions. So there's no significant distinction between questions and answers in this view, which is kind of weird, and also seems to run counter to speech act theory. And you don't want to run counter to a kind of well-established theory of language use. So we've got a dilemma. Either you have a messy semantics, or you kind of an implausible theory. The solution I propose is just to forget that indirect questions are questions at all and class them as answer clauses. Okay? And I think that kind of sounds right. So if you look at 4A and 4B on the sheet, you might ask a friend of yours, what did John buy for Mary? And if he's feeling in a particularly unhelpful mood, he might respond, what John bought for Mary. Kind of irritating, but correct. So it kind of sounds right. And also, it allows us to meet our guiding principle. We're still analysing direct questions, which are the only questions on this view, in terms of what might count as a possible answer, because they're going to denote all of the possible answers. And you have an explanation for how these two kinds of clauses are connected. So direct question, where are my keys? Well, how does that relate to the clause, where my keys are? Well, where my keys are is just an answer to that question. So we've met both of the desiderata. Okay, so how does this feed into an account of specification sentences? Well, what are specification sentences? There's kind of two tests, I guess. They're kind of, well, there might not be two, there might just be different ways of saying the same one for identifying a specification sentence. First is, does it intuitively specify something? Okay? So if you look at 5A and 5B on the sheet, John swims quickly to shore, and that's just describing something John does. If you want to specify the way in which he swims to shore, you might say instead, the way John swims to shore is quickly. And that kind of highlights the the information given in the term that occurs after the copula. And you can kind of, at the other test, which is more or less the same thing, you can ask questions like, what did John do? Okay, 5A is a perfectly acceptable answer to that question. 5B isn't. Even though the information they provide is much the same. And the idea is that it's focusing information. It's a specification sentence. Okay. So there's good reason to think that in specification sentences, the term that occurs after the copula, so in this example quickly, is actually elliptical for a larger clause, an answer clause. And one of the main pieces of evidence cited is just that it solves a puzzle in syntax. So if you look at 6a, John loves himself, and you look at the corresponding syntax tree, and you trace your finger from John up to the node that dominates him, which is S, dominates the word, sorry, and then you trace your finger up from himself up to the node where you can't go any further, and that's also S, so they share a dominating node. And that is the correct syntactic relationship for those terms to stand in order for John to lend its reference to himself. Okay? If you take what John likes is himself instead and look at the corresponding syntax tree, the same doesn't apply. According to syntax theory, they're in the wrong syntactic relationship for the name John to lend its reference to the index call. So people think this is evidence enough that the himself occurring after the copula is actually elliptical for the answer clause John likes himself. And given the typical understanding of clauses such as who John likes that I mentioned earlier, the standard view, this has led people to analyse specification sentences as question and answer pairs. Okay, so before the copula you have who John likes, question, and then after the copula you have the elided answer, John likes himself. Okay, so that solves a nice problem. It has some benefits. Provides a nice solution. But it does have a slightly uncomfortable, well, it has two slightly uncomfortable consequences. The first is you need to give a special interpretation of the copula. Okay, so there is, in specificational sentences under this account, does not express identity. It expresses something like is answered by. It's a special specificational copula. So it seems a little ad hoc for that reason. The other uncomfortable consequence is that you're forced to interpret some clauses as questions that really don't look like questions. So if we go back to the way John swims is quickly, the way John swims has to be interpreted as a question on this account. And given the absence of any kind of interrogative pronoun or work clause, just doesn't seem right. If you feed my thoughts on the semantics of questions into it, instead, the way John swims is going to be an answer, and that seems perfectly acceptable. How does John swim the way John swims? I don't know. So that's better, and also the copula no longer has to have a special kind of interpretation. So on my account, answers are going to pick out their own true answer. Answers are going to pick out the true answer to the corresponding question. Answer clauses are going to pick out the true answer to the corresponding question. And that leaves us open to interpret specificational sentences as equating those two answers, as identifying them. Okay? So far I've kind of been assuming that answer clauses are going to pick out true propositions, and that's the standard assumption in linguistics and philosophy, that what counts as an answer is a proposition. But I'm just going to give a little bit of an indication as to why I think facts would do a better job. So I think answer clauses can occur in other embedded contexts other than specification sentences. So if you look at 7a, what John wants is surprising. Suppose John wants a diamond, and it's kind of unusual. He doesn't usually want diamonds. So what John wants is surprising. It's not the diamond that's surprising. Okay, it's that John wants the diamond that's surprising. So for any sentence like this, what John wants is surprising, you're going to have a corresponding sentence with a that clause instead of the question. Sorry, the answer clause. And then if you try and make explicit what kind of entity we're talking about, the proposition that John wants a diamond is surprising doesn't sound quite right. The fact that John wants a diamond is surprising, that sounds right. And it seems to capture what we mean when we say what John wants is surprising. Okay. I think there's a lot more that can be said about that, but not much time. So I'm now in a position to state the truth conditions of a specification sentence. So if we take what John likes is himself, 6b prime, what John likes is himself is true if and only if the fact that uniquely and exhaustively answers the question, what does John like, is identical to the fact expressed by John likes himself. That's going to get the right truth values in the right situations. Okay, that's only going to be true in worlds where John likes himself. That's right. So what does this tell us about arithmetical sentences? Okay, well, one reason for thinking sentences such as one are specification sentences, well, it's just that they look like them. They appear to specify how many things of a certain collection there are. Okay, so they pass the specification test. You might ask, what is there in the solar system? To which the answer, there are 8 planets, would be perfectly appropriate, but the answer, the number of planets in the solar system is 8, would be very strange. So there's some reasons for thinking that they're specification sentences. The other is that if you do take them to be specification sentences, and so take the 8 occurring after the copula to be elliptical for an answer clause, then the 8 is no longer in singular term position. It just looks like it is. And that solves the puzzle. Because it is kind of puzzling if you take the Phrygian view as to why number terms like this can occur in both singular term and adjectival position. Okay? You can say more or less the same thing by saying there are 8 planets in the solar system as you can by saying the number of planets in the solar system is 8. But it looks like the 8 in both of these is in different syntactic positions, and that's kind of puzzling. On this view, the puzzle is solved. The 8 that looks like it's in a singular term position isn't. It's just in an elided answer clause in which it occurs in its adjectival position. Also, if you take my view and take answer clauses, in this case, the number of planets in the solar system is going to be an answer clause. If you take that to pick out the fact as to how many planets there are in the solar system, it makes sense of some otherwise puzzling predications that seem acceptable. So if you look at 9, the number of roses is surprising. Under the Phrygian view, it looks like you're talking about a number, and numbers aren't surprising. Rather, it's that there are 8 roses that's surprising. So we can give truth conditions for arithmetical sentences. So 8a prime. The number of roses is 12 is true, if and only if the fact that exactly and uniquely answers the question, how many roses are there, is identical with the fact expressed by there are 12 roses. Okay, and I'm in no way committed to which is the right question here. I'm happy to have what is the number of roses as the question. That wasn't like a sly move on my part. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that this account is promising in that it kind of neatens up various areas of semantics. I'm now going to talk about what the kind of philosophical significance of it is. Well, if we take the argument that I talked about at the beginning, so where are we? 1 is true only if the number 8 exists. 1 is true, therefore the number 8 exists. Well, some philosophers have thought that if you can show that sentences such as 1 are specificational sentences and so don't have singular terms standing for numbers in them, then you've effectively undermined these kinds of arguments. But my analysis says otherwise, okay? According to my analysis, number 1 is true only if the fact that uniquely answers the question, how many planets are there in the solar system, is identical with itself. So it's true only if that fact obtains, or exists, I might say. So it seems to me a further question to ask whether that fact, in order for that fact to obtain, mathematical objects must exist. Okay? So you might think in order for that fact to obtain, there must be a set of planets. Or you might think in order for that fact to obtain, there must be a number. Okay? So the take-home message of this talk is to assess these kinds of arguments, we need to do more semantics. Once you've done more semantics, it looks like you need to do some more metaphysics to work out what these kind of facts require to obtain. That's it.
Okay, so there's plenty of time for questions. So, first question over there.
Yeah, I understand your approach to get this semantical account from this, but then you end up with the metaphysics of facts. Mm-hmm. And that's not something that many philosophers would be happy to end up with. At least I would want to see some analysis, what consists of metaphysics of facts. So, do you want to say that the facts are the ultimate matter for semantics, or facts are something that can be analyzed?
No. All I was trying to show was that the syntactic, semantic evidence available with regard to these arithmetical sentences suggests that they're really about facts of a certain kind. And I think that semantic and syntactic evidence does completely underdetermine the nature of the things that we're talking about. I just think it suggests that we are talking about facts, whatever they are. And it's a further metaphysical question.
Yes, I accept that, but when we are talking about what I would say is a valid question in philosophy of mathematics, then there's a lot left after your analysis of facts. So I'm not sure, as an argument in philosophy of mathematics, it is very satisfactory. In semantics, it's a whole different thing.
So, insofar as it contributes to philosophy of mathematics, points us in a different direction. Okay? We can't just do semantics to settle these ontological questions. We have to do a bit of metaphysics as well. Kind of a modest conclusion, I guess. But
So just a quick question about how much you've looked at sort of slightly trickier examples. So for instance, if we, in some kind of scientific discourse, directly assert the existence of a real number or something like this, there is a real number such that it models the behavior of these two particles. So I mean, do you have a similar account that will try and deal with that as well, or is that sort of future work? Or?
That is definitely future work. So at the moment I've just been looking at applied arithmetical sentences. And I'm quite open to the idea that we need something completely different when we're applying pure mathematical theory. So in your case, that would be an application of a pure mathematical theory. If we need a semantics that mentions numbers in that case, then fair enough.
Stuart?
Yeah, I've got actually a couple of things I want to ask you about. I'll pick one now and I'll get back in the queue to ask the other one later. I have to decide now which one. As I understand it, I'm only now getting familiar with the literature on this sort of semantics of cardinals in natural language. The sentence you begin with, yours is, there are 8 planets, something like that?
The number of planets.
Well, that's the, yeah, but then that's supposed to start with, there are 8 planets.
There are 8 planets in the solar
Yeah,
system.
there are 8 planets. And so that, at least on some accounts, has what's called a two-sided reading means, no, sorry, one-sided reading means at least 8.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we go from that reading, if that's the right one, to the answer question? Because it looks like the number of solar planets in the solar system is 8. That's at least only felicitous is as a question answer thing of it's exactly 8.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's really like 30 of them, and somebody says, well, how many planets are there? And the guy says 8. I mean, in some sense, it's true that there are 8 planets if there's 30.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, and kind of an ignored one in the literature. Interesting.
It is. I mean, we just had a conference about 3 weeks ago in when philosophy and linguistics conference on the semantics of cardinals, and at least half the speakers addressed it. So maybe it just didn't make it into the printed literature.
Yeah. Well, there are several ways you could go with it. You could just change what answer clause is elliptical to exactly 8 planets.
But then we want exactly somehow back in the question rather than, and that's it. So that would be a line of 2.
Well, if the question is the number of planets in the solar system,
Yeah.
The definite article will be doing that work. I would have
Well, but
thought.
now it looks like we're going to need numbers. I mean, at least most of the people who sort of argue this way, they realize this is not your agenda, but they're trying to, at least like with Hoffweber, I know Hoffweber doesn't take the question and answer bit, but the idea is that we want to try to analyze it in a way where we're not committed to numbers.
Yeah. So I've been kind of neutral on the question of whether we're committed to numbers. And on my account, the number of planets in the solar system, that clause,
Yeah.
is an answer clause that's going to pick out, the fact as to how many numbers there are. So that's where the kind of exactness would come from. And so, I mean, yeah, I will have to address that, so I could change the answer clause to there are exactly 8 planets, or the other way you could go is just say that sentences like this are strictly people speaking false, that we have a loose manner of talking.
Yeah, I know, that's a move that's kind of popular among some linguists. I never liked it. But, right? I mean, obviously, there are times that we speak loosely, but you don't want to claim that we're speaking loosely all the time.
Yeah. That's the point.
But I guess that's a move. Another would be to opt with the two-sided meaning. I don't know which one is, but at least some of them argue that the right meaning of the adjective is two-sided. I mean, exactly it.
All right.
Yeah. Kennedy is one of them, I think.
Kennedy.
Chris Kennedy.
Thanks.
Okay, any further questions? Not there?
Just a curiosity, I didn't quite get why at the beginning of your talk you draw a connection between easy arguments that say just that it is true that the number of planets is 8 and the Freudian analysis of the number of 8 as a singular term is correct. But I didn't see why you put this in connection with indispensability, because indispensability seems a red herring. Even if it were even if number talk were dispensable, if the Freudian analysis were correct, and if really it is true that the number of planets is 8, then 8 exists, and it's quite irrelevant whether we can paraphrase this out.
Well, you're relying there on the easy argument again, aren't you? So someone who wants to use the indispensability argument instead presumably doesn't find those arguments that convincing. So they're going to say, well, we need this talk, and this talk is about numbers. So
so they are two distinct.
yeah,
Distinct. Okay. I didn't
Okay.
We're putting together things.
No, I was just giving some examples of how this is rendered. Thanks.
Any further questions? Okay.
The second,
Is Stuart,
Yeah, I guess so, but
go ahead.
it came up earlier. I actually don't know if anyone in the literature actually uses the easy argument. Is this working? Yeah. Who actually uses the easy argument to argue for numbers. Well, certainly Frege did. I mean, Frege in effect is arguing for the existence of numbers, and then when he comes up with the other one, the adjectival one, he says, well, that can always be rephrased, but obviously if you're in the rephrasing business, you can rephrase the other one. But so Frege had already convinced himself that numbers are objects before he actually got to that. And it comes back to what was asked earlier. I mean, there's sort of, among people who sort of wonder about the semantics of cardinals, in philosophy anyway, some are worried about the use of cardinal words in ordinary language, which is what you are, right? And others are more thinking about, no, I'm interested in arithmetic as a language in its own right, where we actually are theorizing about numbers. Right? And your argument doesn't have any bearing on that one.
No, it doesn't. That's right. But, I mean, hopefully it will eventually.
Well,
or, I mean,
right. If I want to say that as part of my theorizing that there are at least 30 prime numbers between 1 million and 2 million, you can sort of paraphrase away. It looks like we're actually talking about numbers.
Well, yeah, it also looks like you're using a pure theory there, pure arithmetic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm not.
Well, so some of us are sort of interested in that.
Yeah.
And the use of arithmetic in science and so on, right?
Well, I'm quite happy to. I mean, it seems to me that you are going to need a semantics about that says that.
Yeah.
Theories like that are about numbers.
Right.
And so you're going to need, if you want to be a nominalist or whatever, you're going to need a different story about what's going on there.
Right, and those are the cases that I think a lot of, at least the traditional folks in philosophy and mathematics care about those, and less so about natural language.
Yeah. I'm untraditional in that sense.
Not that you're, not that there aren't some very interesting philosophical and linguistic puzzles concerning how to understand cardinals in natural language. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, if not, let's thank Robert.